Hi, everybody. This is John Hinshaw, and I'd like to welcome you to Dutchircan. The image you see here is of Ramoneta Santiago, who's a really important character in this story, and she was raised for part of her life behind the Weber family, who you see standing next to one of the Weber daughters, and she was raised in a small converted chicken house, nicer than this one, clearly. But housing and that kind of hybridity between what we used to think of as Pennsylvania Dutch, or we used to think of as Puerto Rican, is an important part of the story. I'm a historian, so a lot of the history is front loaded into this exhibit. So you see, in this image, you see the Dutchircan. These are the Puerto Rican tomateros, the guys who pick the tomatoes, who are an important part of the story. They also lived in houses very much like this one, and they were pivotal because that is an early way that a lot of Puerto Ricans came to rule central Pennsylvania. They came to pick tomatoes as a seasonal crop. It actually fit nicely with the downtime in the sugar industry, which was dominant in Puerto Rico in the 1940s. So when the sugar, in the dead zone of sugar, men would fly to the U.S. and then pick tomatoes, and this is a scene of that. And that's part of this larger transition that historians talk about of industrialization or field to factory. Housing is an important theme of the exhibit, and here you see an external shot of a chicken shed of the kind that you would have seen from the interior shot before. The relationship between tomateros and farmers was a bit like sharecropping. It's in one level, it's a fair trade. On the other hand, it's really unequal. The guys who are working want to make money, and the farmers have jobs for them to do. So in that sense, it really works out. On the other hand, as the phrase "this is my cave" suggests, the physical environment as well as the work is a reminder that workers don't have dignity. And so the exhibit on the inside shows both the examples of hard work and the efforts to maintain a sense of dignity by having symbols of their manhood or symbols of their nationality. So we put Rita Moreno, who at that time was an artist kind of breaking onto the scene, the first Puerto Rican star of screen and stage. The Streetroad colleagues did such an amazing job in terms of organizing the space. It's such a shame you can't be there in person. So we designed a number of posters to show the rootedness of Latinx people in this part of the world. The first poster you see is Francisco de Miranda, who's one of the founding fathers of Venezuela, but also was an important figure in the American Revolutionary War. To the right, you see John Ortega, who was one of the first, was the first Hispanic recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is our highest military honor. So I think it's important to remember that while there weren't large numbers of Latinx people in the American Revolution or at that time, there were some, and they were contributing to the creation of the American Republic, defending it in times of extreme danger, and were part and parcel of making Pennsylvania what it is today. Trujillo y Torres was an author in post-revolutionary Philadelphia, and he encouraged greater trade and commerce between Pennsylvania and the Caribbean. There are a lot more Latinx people in Pennsylvania now in the last 20, 25 years, and that's almost entirely due, as you can see in the image, from people moving out from New York City because of the lack of affordable housing.
This is Yvette Guzman Zavala. When those tomato pickers or tomateros came to the United States, they not always traveled alone, and women became important agents for maintaining cultural and social traditions and establishing new ones. One example is the Ramonita Santiago's family story as told by Shirley Ball in At Every Gate Apparel from 1986. And another example is Grandma Ortega, a Mexican woman who provided one of the first meeting houses for the Latino Mennonites in central PA. Another venue for personal interaction happened through the Fresh Air program. Elaine Showalter, a Mennonite woman that participated in the program, describes the girl, Vicky Martinez, as a breath of fresh air that saves and brings new life to her own. This description reverses the traditional expectation that the Puerto Rican child needed to learn from the woman. And instead, the child teaches the woman about family, cultural values, and love. This exhibition includes some photographs that I took of the Latinx community, and in many instances, the contributions of women are evident. You probably noticed that our approach combines academic research in the humanities and also oral histories of people in the community. This brings me to the celebration of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The Mexican celebration of La Guadalupe brings many Latinos to St. Benedict the Abbot Catholic Church in Lebanon, PA, to celebrate with music, dance, and a reenactment of the saint's miracle. Malinali is the name of a dance group organized by community leader Guadalupe Barba that participates every year. In one photograph here, two girls pray in front of the Virgin, an image that mirrors the adoration of Juan Diego to the Holy Mother in 1531. The 16th century origin story involves mostly men, Juan Diego and the Bishop of Puebla, Juan de Zumárraga, for example. By contrast, this celebration at St. Benedict's Church involves more than 40 women and a few men. More typical of the event is the image here, with shows a young woman shortly before dancing. Absent from these photos are the countless hours spent making the dresses, organizing rehearsals, and cooking the food. Without the participation of these women, the celebration of the Virgin would not be the same. Other transnational practices and cultural traditions that are portrayed in my photos involved food like Chayo's Mexican tamales and the incorporation of piñatas in several parties. The piñata's historical roots tie with Chinese, Spanish, Italian, and Mesoamerican indigenous traditions, specifically Mayan and Aztec. The barber shop, like Dominican's Francisco Peña's New York style in Lebanon, is a space for socialization and cultural affirmation for Latinos in the diaspora. It provides a source of pride and dignity about their physical appearance that questions stereotypical images that otherwise abound. This one is also an example of the entrepreneurship of the Dominican community in the United States. This cuatro is courtesy of the family of Ivor Tirado of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we want to thank Dr. Noralis Ruiz for lending us this beautiful instrument. It is a 10-string lute, typically used to perform the island's folk music or Jíbaro tradition. The instrument has played an integral role in shaping the cultural identity, where it is regarded as the national instrument. This model represents the modern cuatro that flourished in Puerto Rico in the 1920s, and it characterized by its violin shape. The 10 metal strings are arranged in 5 pairs, and each pair is tuned in intervals of fourths. In a music ensemble, the cuatro is played with a pick or plectrum, and its melodic roll is usually accompanied by a guitar, guiro, and bongos. Currently, with more Puerto Ricans living in the United States than on the island, the Puerto Rican population stateside keeps creating, innovating, and showcasing the cuatro in major events and festivals, some of which attract cuatro music enthusiasts from Puerto Rico and the United States. From the first waves of Puerto Rican migration early in the 20th century, the cuatro has evolved, developed, and transformed in the hands of cuatro players away from the island. The first commercial recordings featuring the instrument were performed and produced in New York City. The cuatro has expanded its role beyond Jíbaro music and nowadays is used in classical and popular music.
These 4 photographs were taken by Rolf Ross, who's an artist that works up in northeastern Pennsylvania, who was introduced to me by a good friend of mine, Drake Gomez, who works at Keystone College. And so they explore some themes that the rest of the exhibit is also looking at. So we were very, very pleased he allowed us to use them. Rolf Ross's images show both the poignancy, that the centrality of family, and that's why people are doing this incredibly hard work. Here you see agricultural workers doing the same kinds of labor, lifting buckets of produce into the back of a truck, and how physically demanding it is, how arguably degrading the environment is, how difficult it is to maintain a sense of dignity and respect, and then how people reassert that dignity through ritual, through often around food. So I think there's a lot of continuity between the work that he did and our work.
At Christmas time, Puerto Ricans celebrate trullas where the typical cuatro can be heard. In this picture, Mexican and other Latinos from Lebanon celebrate the posadas, which is Spanish for lodging or accommodation, a similar tradition inspired by the migrant condition. Just as Mary and Joseph looked for shelter, in the posadas, people sing from house to house to commemorate that event. We want to thank Rolf Ross for lending us his work and acknowledge Frank Espada's huge contribution to this history. We also need to thank graphic artist Fernando Rompedrique, who designed most of our posters. He did an amazing job, as you saw. Iraida Cacique, she knows why, Guadalupe Barba, Maribel Gonzalez, Jorge Duani, and all the people who agreed to have their picture taken. Thank you.
These images were done by the great Puerto Rican photographer Frank Espada, who was part of his diaspora project in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I love this photograph because it's a couple, one of whom is from Pennsylvania, one of whom is from Puerto Rico, and they're in the context of Chester County as mushroom workers. So most of these images are from Chester County. Here you see the kind of, again, the enduring themes of how difficult the work is, how there's a kind of demand to do it. This is from Harrisburg, the kind of other side of the state from Chester County, and you see the really kind of squalid conditions that Puerto Ricans found themselves in. This image is of a Puerto Rican worker being evicted from his company housing in Chester County. We would like to thank all the institutions and people who helped us with this project, beginning with the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society, Joel Kneifziger, Dr. Rolando Santiago, Becca Carpenter, Dr. Barbara McNulty, the Suzanne Arnold Art Gallery at Lebanon Valley College, also the LVC Innovation Fund, the Dick Joyce Fund of the History Department, the Serby Fund of the Languages Department, and everybody who agreed to be interviewed for us, and all the ideas we got from them. Thank you very much.